Welcome back, Defenders. There's a lot going on in the world, and I didn't see this coming. South Korean president declares martial law, but is met with immediate opposition from the parliament. I didn't have this on my 2024 bingo board, but it looks like there might be a military coup happening in South Korea. So the president of South Korea went on TV to address the nation, and this is what he said. "I am declaring a state of emergency in order to protect the constitutional order based on freedom and eradicate shameful pro-North Korean anti-state groups. They are stealing freedom and happiness of our people," Yoon said on the country's YTN news channel. He added that this would protect the country from the threats of North Korea's communist forces. While the imposition of martial law may cause significant inconvenience to the law-abiding citizens who uphold the constitutional values of the Republic of Korea, I will strive to minimize these disruptions. Okay. Technically, the president of South Korea does have the power to declare martial law, but this hasn't happened in South Korea since 1980. And in 1980, South Korea was a military dictatorship. So if you were to declare martial law, like Ukraine has done, it's because your country has been invaded, or maybe there was a natural disaster. People are scratching their heads and wondering, what triggered this? What would cause this? Now, people in South Korea are trying to understand and react to what's happening. This is Mike Valero of CNN on the ground in Seoul, outside the State Assembly building.
We're here in the crowd, and there are two military vehicles that are trying to get out of here. We're just a few blocks away from the National Assembly. There were some soldiers that were saying their military vehicles are trying to leave the area and get back to their base. Protesters, of course, voicing their huge outrage in this moment. Local police with shields around us. We're gonna move a couple steps away. Oh, and look at this one over here. Unbelievable.
So at the moment, people are confused. There's not really any violence or anything too terrible happening. But special forces have stormed the Capitol building. They've broken through windows to get into certain legislators' offices. So it's obvious the president of South Korea is trying to seize documents or computers or electronics or arrest members of South Korea's parliament. That's pretty serious. This is South Korea's opposition leader. His name is Lee Jae-myung, and he's in a car trying to get back to the National Assembly building, and this is what he's telling his supporters. "The president has declared martial law. There is no reason to declare martial law and let the military rule this country. I can't leave it alone. This violent control by the prosecution is also not enough. With a gun and a sword, armed soldiers are currently taking over this country and want to dominate." And he's now going to talk directly to South Korean soldiers receiving these orders. "Dear soldiers, only the people can give you orders. President Yoon Suk-yeol betrayed the people. President Yoon Suk-yeol's illegal emergency declaration, it is invalid. From this moment on, President Yoon Suk-yeol is not the president of the Republic of Korea. You guys, the barriers, you guys, the guns you hold, the swords you hold, it's your power. It all comes from the people. The people are the masters of this country. The master to whom all soldiers must obey is not President Yoon Suk-yeol. It's the people. The people. President Yoon Suk-yeol's emergency concept doesn't allow, or it shouldn't be allowed." Okay, so South Korean politics is kind of complicated. South Korea was a pro-capitalist dictatorship up until the early 90s. They then got real democratic reforms after the Soviet Union collapsed. And the track record for South Korean presidents is not very good. Over the last 30 years, I think with the exception of one, every former president of South Korea has either been arrested and gone to jail for corruption or has committed suicide while under investigation for corruption. The two most recent presidents, we have Lee Myung-bak. He was arrested in March of 2018 on charges of bribery, embezzlement, and tax evasion. The more recent South Korean president, Park Geun-hye, she was impeached and then sentenced to 24 years in prison for corruption and abuse of power. I don't know why this keeps happening in South Korea. Every president they elect can't help themselves, and they engage in various forms of corruption. And everything that I've observed as an outsider of President Yoon Suk-yeol, I thought he was a decent guy, a decent fellow, but he's got some explaining to do. In the next 24 to 48 hours, he has to present to the people of South Korea justification for a declaration of martial law. What was the clear and present danger? What was the immediate threat to justify smashing in windows and seizing computers or documents from members of South Korea's parliament? There might be some grand conspiracy. Russia and North Korea might be involved. Or this guy's corrupt, like most of South Korea's previous democratically elected presidents, and he's trying to basically cover his own ass. The people of South Korea are really good at protesting. If you've never seen a South Korean protest, they're pretty spectacular to watch. And even though it's December and it's pretty cold, I imagine there are various activist groups in South Korea already organizing to oppose this guy and whatever anti-democratic campaign he's currently initiated in. This is very confusing, very alarming, and we're going to learn more in the next couple days. But let's get back to the other crazy story happening around the world. Russian and Syrian jets intensify bombing of Syria's rebel-held northwest territory. So the rebels, at the moment, are only about 35 kilometers from Russia's airbase in Syria. The naval port is farther south. And the rebels need to reach Damascus in order to topple Assad's regime. And Syria is insanely complicated. I have to oversimplify things in order to make a YouTube video for you guys. So here is the idiot's guide to the Syrian civil war factions put out by friend of the channel, Ryan Macbeth. And for the pro-Assad forces, you've got Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and then Trump's nominee for National Security Director, Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know why she supports Syria so much. And the people trying to topple Assad is a bunch of different rebel groups. You've got HTS, an Islamic militia. They're the ones making the gains near Aleppo. You've got an Al-Qaeda-affiliated group, but they're anti-ISIS. You've got the Syrian Democratic Forces. These are the Kurds, backed by the United States. A group called People's Protection Unit. The Free Syrian Army. These are former Assad loyalists. And then you have the Syrian National Army, backed by the Turks. Given that all the funding and equipment is coming from the north, it's coming from Turkey. It's not coming from the United States. Here is the map. This is the city of Aleppo, close to 2 million people. This was the territory occupied by the rebels. This was 6 days ago. And this is what the map looks like now. Assad's forces are not putting up much of a fight. The Russians just don't have the spare capacity to save Assad's regime at the moment. So the Russians, not Assad's forces, the Russians are retreating from Hama and Homs because they don't have faith in their Syrian partners to actually stick and fight. And the Russians don't want to be captured. Actual Russian citizens, Russian soldiers, don't want to be captured by any of the Syrian rebels. Lots of crazy videos online of the rebels capturing abandoned Syrian outposts. The rebels are capturing tanks and armored vehicles. They're also capturing air defense systems. This is a Syrian rebel group capturing an S-125 air defense position east of Aleppo, and this is what the surface-to-air missiles look like. But for fun, let me play for you one of these videos, and you can see the proud warriors of the Syrian rebels taking on Assad's regime and the Russians.
الله أكبر. تم تحرير كتيبة طلحاسة 599 في طلحاسة في تاريخ 1/12/2024 على يد أبطال قوات فجر الحرية. هذه الصواريخ كلها فاسدة ومرتبطة. الخنزير الأسد هي دفع حقها مصاري من دماء الشعب السوري. لعنة الله عليك يا أسد، لعنة الله عليك. نعم نعم الله أكبر. انتبه هلا يكون المقامات الجمعات. الله أكبر. يا بشار أسد تحت أقدام أبطال فجر الحرية. الله أكبر. الحمد لله.
These guys look pretty proud of themselves. Here's a video, I'll link this down below, of a military college. You can see the Syrian flag and the Russian flag. This is where Syrian soldiers and Syrian officers met with Russians to receive intelligence and training, but this office has been captured. Let's get the Russians' reaction on Kremlin State TV. Here's Solyov talking about what's happening in Syria. We understand that the situation in Syria is not at all simple. We can't be more Syrian than the Syrians themselves. This is the Russians expressing their frustration that Assad's forces are refusing to fight and they just keep retreating. This is also very important. Plus, Aleppo is in the area of responsibility of our Iranian colleagues. So this is the Russians now blaming the Iranians for the loss of Aleppo. Well, we have to fix it. Well, until we deal with the situation in Ukraine, it will not be so easy for us to free the entire contingent. But what is happening in Syria is very important, less for us. They didn't finish off Idlib, this is a city in Syria. They believe the words of neighbors and partners. I think he's talking about Turkey. How many have they waited for before returning to their initial plans? That's why all those who say, well, let's do it now, let's make a deal. Fake news is already appearing. We will stop here or there. No. It will result in the same situation. They will build up power and get rearmed. Until the abscess is removed, there will be more threats. This is Solyov basically saying because these rebel groups were never annihilated, they were never completely crushed, this outcome was inevitable, that they would use a pause in the fighting to rearm and then come back for more. So Turkey is calling for reconciliation between the Syrian government and the oppositions to end the civil war that's been going on for 13 years. And Turkey has been the biggest loser of this civil war, with millions of Syrian refugees in Turkey or transiting through Turkey to get to the European Union. And this is a proxy war between Turkey and Iran, Iran also being allied with Russia. Iraq, more or less, is now a proxy state of Iran, and I do think Iran's military and the Iraqi military, they're going to cross the desert to directly engage with these Syrian rebel groups to try to help us save Assad. Will it work? I don't know. Does Israel have anything to say? I don't know. Will Turkey's military get directly involved? It wouldn't be very hard for Turkey's military to cross this border and wipe out the rebels themselves. I mean, they're using them as a proxy, but I don't think even Turkey cares about any of these people. It's just a never-ending conflict as long as Assad stays in power. And the only reason why Assad stays in power is because Putin wants him there. He wants access to the Mediterranean coast, he wants this naval base, and he wants this airfield. The other hot zone is Georgia. Once again, with the geography of this region, Georgia is also located on Turkey's border. Tens of thousands rally in Georgia as the Prime Minister rebuffs calls for a new election. The election that Georgia had last month was not free and fair. The Georgia Dream Party, the evidence is irrefutable that the election was rigged with the help of the Russians. Thousands rally after Georgia Prime Minister vows no negotiations with any of the pro-EU opposition forces. And reminder, this is the majority of people in Georgia. The videos are online. I'll link these down below if you want to see scenes from the protests and the rioting and the people fighting for their freedom. As long as the police forces still defend the government, I don't know if the protesters will be able to overwhelm them. Ukraine's Maidan revolution in 2014 lasted for months. Months of occupation, months of protesting before Viktor Yanukovych finally fled the country. And he's still alive. He's still hanging out in Russia, maybe waiting to come back. Kremlin compares Georgia protests to Ukraine's Orange Revolution. Yeah, it's the exact same thing. These countries don't want Russia meddling in their politics, buying their politicians, writing their laws, and preventing them from having real democratic reforms, real prosperity in their own countries. The other top story, Chancellor Scholz visits Kyiv for the first time in over 2 years. I guess I wasn't paying attention, but Chancellor Scholz hasn't visited Ukraine in over 2 years. The German Chancellor is expected to announce arms shipments, so anytime a head of state visits Ukraine, there's usually a security package announcement. Scholz arrives in Kyiv and pledges $680 million in military support, to include handing over another Iris-T air defense system, Leopard 1 tanks, and combat drones. Here's the full list: 10 Leopard 1 tanks, 60 armored cars and M84 and M80 tanks, 6,000 unguided and 500 guided missiles, as well as drones. Thank you so much to the German people. This help is badly needed. But Zelensky is getting real in this joint address with Chancellor Scholz, and I think Chancellor Scholz went to Ukraine to speak in person with Zelensky to take the temperature, to understand what does Zelensky think is possible at this point going forward, given everything that's happening in the world. And Zelensky says Ukraine's NATO invitation is necessary for Ukraine's survival. It's the only way to guarantee security. Ukraine won't accept anything less than NATO membership because of broken promises in the past. The Budapest Memorandum of 1994, Russia signed it, the United Kingdom signed it, the United States signed it. This was supposed to be a security guarantee. Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, and Russia promised never to invade them, and the Western nuclear powers promised to protect Ukraine. So there is no bilateral agreements. There is no Minsk III or any kind of piece of paper that Zelensky or the people of Ukraine will ever sign, because they've all been broken, time and time again by the Russians. It will just happen again unless Ukraine can find a way to get into NATO. And Zelensky's willing to be flexible. Article 5 protections wouldn't apply to the occupied territories. Zelensky's saying we could freeze the conflict where it is. Ukraine will never recognize their territory as belonging to Russia. But what Ukraine does control can join NATO. And then some kind of diplomatic solution could be achieved in the future by future politicians. Our army lacks the strength. Zelensky advocates for diplomacy over force to reclaim their lost land. Zelensky said that his country is in a complicated period of the war, but there will be no capitulation from the side of Ukraine. It's been a long 3 years, and Ukraine liberated their territories in the north. They liberated their territory in Kharkiv. They liberated their territory on the north bank of the river in Kherson. They smashed the Russian Black Sea fleets, liberated Snake Island, and they're getting their grain exports in and out. Ukraine has achieved a lot, but they're just not getting enough support from the West to retake the occupied territories. And realistically, at this point, the only way for Ukraine to get everything back is we need some kind of political or economic collapse inside of Russia. We need Putin to die, or Putin's government to expire somehow. And then in the future, there could be some kind of reunification, comparable to West Germany and East Germany after the fall of the Berlin Wall. It's not ideal. It's not what Ukrainians are fighting for and dying for right now. But this is the political reality. This is the direction we're going in. I appreciate President Zelensky for having the courage to speak like this. I do think when Trump gets elected on January 20th, there will be talks, there will be negotiations. How long they'll last, we don't know. But there has to be real security guarantees. That's the bottom line. Otherwise, Ukraine can't freeze the war. They can't stop this war. And at the moment, there's no indication that Putin is looking to engage in good faith negotiations. Putin is uninterested in negotiating peace and wants Ukraine's complete capitulation. They say this every day on Kremlin State TV. Here is Mardan on his show, and every host on Kremlin State TV says the exact same thing. You know, I recalled in 2022 and even 2023 when quite a few people were hysterical talking about peace talks, that everything was about to end, that we were betrayed. Back then, with the persistence of a maniac, I said, guys, you're not comprehending it. All of Putin's statements, his whole logic, which sounded absolutely open and extremely precise, speaks of one thing. If necessary, Russia will fight until the end, until all the goals and objectives of the special military operation are achieved. Translated into simple, everyday language, the liquidation of the state political entity called Ukraine is inevitable, logical, and consistent with the national interests of Russia and the Russian people. Complete liquidation and capitulation of Ukraine. Mardan is saying that Putin is not going to negotiate. He's not going to stop because he thinks he's winning. We'll tell General Kellogg to screw himself, Putin's crony on potential peace talks. Putin would reject a ceasefire plan proposed by Trump's Ukraine special envoy nominee. This is what the Russians are publicly saying. Behind the scenes, I know Russia's economy is pretty bad right now, but of course this is what they're going to say publicly. But what do they really think? We're going to find out together in January. So this is going to be a staring match, basically. Donald Trump promised his voters that he could end this war in 24 hours. Nobody really believes that. It's just an expression. But there does need to be some kind of tangible progress in the first couple weeks, the first 100 days of his administration. And I do have tremendous faith in General Keith Kellogg. He understands the threat from the Russians. He's sympathetic to Ukraine's position. And I like everything he's saying. He's a Fox News contributor, and 2 days ago he made another appearance. And I do want to share with you his message. This is a very important talking point for MAGA and Trump voters. I love everything this guy has been saying. So this is what he's been asked about President Biden trying to rush deliver as much as possible prior to leaving office on January 20th.
So Jake Sullivan was asked about that on U.S. support to Ukraine in the final days of the Biden administration. He said this just yesterday. Listen.
We are going to do everything in our power for these 50 days to get Ukraine all the tools we possibly can to strengthen their position on the battlefield so that they'll be stronger at the negotiating table. And President Biden directed me to oversee a massive surge in the military equipment that we are delivering to Ukraine so that we have spent every dollar that Congress has appropriated to us by the time that President Biden leaves office.
I'm going to get your thoughts on that from the...
So President Biden is trying to deliver and appropriate as much as possible to not leave any money left over for Trump, for fear Trump won't use it. Some people who voted for Trump are upset by this, saying this is inappropriate. Trump is the incoming president. He should have the ability to decide to do whatever he wants with this money. And this is Trump's special envoy pushing back.
Outgoing administration, General.
Yeah, in a way, it's really pretty good for the president-elect because it gives him leverage. He can make the decision on what he wants to do, and the more that the Biden administration does this, it creates a greater opportunity for the president-elect to do what he wants to do. And again, he understands leverage probably better than anybody based on his business experience. But, go back to September when Zelensky came to Trump Tower and he went up there and then he and the president spoke and they were talking about after 1,000 days of war, they're signaling it's time for this war to end. Because the president said very clearly, and so quote, it is time. And he's right about that.
There's no controversy. General Kellogg is saying that whatever Biden wants to do to strengthen Ukraine's position on the battlefield today, this actually helps Donald Trump. It gives him more leverage in negotiations. So there's no conflict between the outgoing Biden administration and the incoming Trump administration on this issue. Thank you. I just want to say thank you to General Kellogg for being... Thank you to President Trump for picking this guy. He understands the situation and he's doing the best he can. I have faith in this man. This is good news. And the United States announced their next military aid package worth $725 million. Included is the usual good stuff: air defense systems, Stinger missiles, artillery, javelins, tow missiles, everything Ukraine needs to stay in the fight today. Okay, let's do another update on the Christmas Convoy fundraiser. We're going to keep this open for another couple days. I know there are people who get paid on the 1st of the month, and they said they were waiting to donate. It's not too late if you want to kick in $5 or $10. Already 12,434 heroes have contributed to this campaign. I know there are lots of people already contributing to other worthy causes. Don't worry about it if you haven't. Just being a part of this channel, just liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing my content, you are part of this channel fundraiser. I greatly appreciate you. So I do want to shout out some heroes who donated. We've got David with a $26 donation. Here's Aldis. Though it might seem like some of the government heads around Europe are being timid, we regular folk are all behind your heroics in full force. Hold strong and persevere. Here's from Hans Peter, a $31 donation. Thank you. Don, 114. Keep up the good work, Jake. Suggestion, interview Chris, the Ukrainian Canadian. I don't know who that is, but I can search for him. Here's a $10 donation from Jonathan. I'm so proud of you, Jake. I've been watching you since the beginning, and you've done an amazing job. What we all need is a record of all the atrocities Russia has committed over the last 3 years in a 60-second video for the unbelievers. Weird word, I hope, but you get what I mean. Here's a 10-pound donation from Keith. Keep up the great work, Jake. Really appreciate what you're doing. Here's a message from George. During the years of war, the brave, intelligent, and resourceful Ukrainian people became an ideal and a role model for us ashamed EU citizens. Okay. Ukraine will be our citizen of honor in the EU and in NATO. Thank you, Jake Bro, for your persistent efforts. The donation is for a drone as a loud Christmas present for the Russian attackers. These fundraisers do mean a lot to the people of Ukraine, knowing that they're still being supported, knowing that people haven't forgotten them after 3 years. Final video I want to share with you is President Zelensky and Chancellor Scholz honoring the memory of fallen warriors. That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.